When I broke my hip, my daughter said, "Stop being dramatic. It's just a minor injury. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from to let me know where in the world you are." The pain was a white-hot scream that shot from my hip all the way up my spine. It was a vicious, jagged thing, so sharp and absolute that it stole the air from my lungs. One moment, I was reaching for the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice on the highest shelf, David's favorite, the one with the cracked leather spine, and the next, the world had tilted violently, sending me crashing down onto the hardwood floor. The sound was sickening, a dull crack that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence of the house. For a long moment, I just lay there, a crumpled heap of soft wool and searing agony, staring at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeam that sliced across the living room rug. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. This house, the one David and I had filled with 60 years of laughter, arguments, and quiet moments, had never felt so large or so empty. His scent, a faint trace of cedar and old books, seemed to linger in the air, a ghostly comfort that did little to ease the fire in my bones. Panic, cold and slick, began to creep in around the edges of the pain. I couldn't move. I tried to push myself up, but a fresh wave of nausea and agony slammed into me, forcing me back down with a groan. My phone was on the kitchen counter, a lifetime away. My daughter Clara was supposed to be coming over. She was already late, which was nothing new, but for the first time in my life, her tardiness felt less like a casual disregard and more like a life-threatening delay. When the doorbell finally chimed, the sound was both a relief and a new source of dread. I had to call out, and my voice, when I found it, was a thin, reedy thing I barely recognized. "Clara, in here. I'm in the living room." The clicking of her heels on the entryway tiles was a familiar sound, usually one that brought a smile to my face. Today, it sounded like a ticking clock. She appeared in the archway, her face a mask of mild annoyance. She was holding her phone, her thumb still swiping across the screen. "Mother, honestly, I was just about to text you. I'm running late for my salon appointment." Her eyes, the same deep blue as her father's, finally flickered down and registered my position on the floor. Her annoyance didn't vanish. It just shifted, curdling into impatience. "What on earth are you doing down there? Did you trip over the rug again? I've told you about that." "I fell, Clara," I gasped, the words costing me more effort than I could have imagined. "The step stool. I think I've broken something. My hip." She sighed, a long, put-upon exhalation, and tucked her phone into her purse. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't kneel. She stood there, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against her designer handbag, her gaze critical. "Honestly, Mother, you're always so dramatic. You probably just twisted it. Here, let me help you up." She reached for my arm, and I flinched, a cry of pure, undiluted pain escaping my lips before I could stop it. "No! Don't touch me! I can't move! It's serious!" That's when her husband, Mark, appeared behind her. He was a soft, doughy man who seemed to exist as a silent, nodding accessory to his wife's life. He peered at me over her shoulder, his expression more awkward than concerned. "Is everything all right, Helen?" "She thinks she's broken her hip," Clara said, her voice laced with a weary skepticism that cut me deeper than the fall itself. She rolled her eyes, a gesture clearly meant for Mark, but one she didn't bother to hide from me. She was trying to climb the bookshelves again. The trip to the hospital was a blur of hazy fluorescent lights and mumbled apologies from paramedics, who treated me with a gentle kindness that felt alien after my daughter's reaction. Clara sat in the front of the ambulance, texting furiously. I could see her reflection in the window, her face pinched with irritation. She was rescheduling her hair appointment, I was sure of it. Mark followed in their car, a silent shadow in our wake. In the emergency room, the world slowed to a crawl. I was wheeled into a cubicle, the thin curtain doing little to muffle the cacophony of beeps, coughs, and hurried conversations. Clara stood by the door, arms crossed, checking the time on her watch every few minutes. "This is going to take forever," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "My whole afternoon is shot." I closed my eyes, a burning shame prickling behind them. My pain was an inconvenience. My crisis was a disruption to her schedule. I thought of David. If he had been here, he would have been holding my hand, his voice a low, calming rumble. He would have been my fierce advocate, demanding answers from doctors, ensuring my comfort, his entire world narrowing to my well-being. The comparison was a fresh wound, and I felt a tear slide from the corner of my eye and trace a cold path into my hair. A young, kind-faced doctor eventually came in, a file in his hand and a serious expression on his face. He pulled up a stool. "Helen, I'm Dr. Evans. We've just looked at your x-rays. You have a clean fracture of the femoral neck. It's a broken hip. We're going to need to admit you and schedule you for surgery." The words were stark, final. Surgery. A broken hip. It wasn't drama. It was real. I felt a strange, hollow sort of vindication. I looked over at Clara, expecting to see, what? Concern? Regret? A flicker of sympathy? Instead, her face hardened. She stepped forward, intercepting the doctor as if I weren't even there. "Surgery? Are you sure? Isn't that a bit extreme for a woman her age? What are the risks?" Her tone was sharp, accusatory. The doctor looked taken aback. "Ma'am, it's a serious injury. Surgery is the standard and most effective treatment. It will offer her the best chance at regaining mobility." Clara let out a sharp, cutting laugh, a sound that made my stomach clench. "Mobility? Doctor, my mother is 70 years old. Her most strenuous activity is walking to the mailbox. This seems like a lot of fuss." And then she turned to me, her voice dropping to a syrupy, condescending tone she often used when she thought she was being gentle. "Mother, listen, maybe we should get a second opinion. A little bed rest is probably all you need. You just need to stop being so dramatic. It's just a minor injury, really." "It's a broken hip, Clara," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "A hairline fracture, I'm sure." She waved a dismissive hand. "You have a tendency to exaggerate." In that moment, lying on that stiff gurney under the unflattering hospital lights, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered. It was the foundation of love and trust I had spent a lifetime building. For years, I had made excuses for her. "She's stressed. She's busy. She doesn't mean it." But this was different. This was a cruelty so profound, so naked, that it couldn't be excused away. She wasn't just dismissing my pain, she was invalidating my existence. And Mark, her silent, spineless husband, just stood there, nodding in agreement. The doctor, to his credit, looked appalled. He squared his shoulders and spoke directly to me, his voice firm and clear. "Helen, this is not a minor injury. We need to proceed with the surgery. I'm admitting you now. We'll make you as comfortable as possible." Clara huffed, crossing her arms again. "Fine. Do what you have to. But I can't stay. Mark and I have a dinner reservation we simply can't break. We'll check in tomorrow." She didn't even say goodbye. She just turned, her heels clicking an angry retreat out of the cubicle, with Mark trailing obediently behind her. The curtain swished shut, leaving me alone with the kind doctor and the screaming silence where my daughter's love should have been. The physical pain in my hip was immense, but it was nothing compared to the gaping, hollow ache that had just opened up in my heart. The days following the surgery were a morphine-laced fog of pain management, physical therapy, and the relentless, cheerful efficiency of the hospital staff. They were kind, professional, and treated me with a dignity my own daughter had denied me. Clara did visit, once. She brought a bouquet of carnations, the cheapest flowers in the gift shop. their cloying sweetness filling my small room. She stayed for exactly 15 minutes. She spent most of that time complaining about the cost of hospital parking and the inconvenience of having to ferry my mail from my house. Mark stood by the window, staring out at the cityscape, contributing nothing but his silent, complicit presence. "The therapist says you're not trying hard enough, Mother," Clara said, examining her nails. "You have to push yourself if you ever want to get out of here." "It hurts, Clara," I said, my voice quiet. The incision was a fiery line along my thigh, and every small movement was a lesson in agony. "Of course it hurts. It's supposed to hurt," she replied, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "No pain, no gain. You can't just lie there feeling sorry for yourself." She left without a hug, without a soft touch on my arm, without a single word of genuine comfort. The flowers she left behind seemed to mock me from the bedside table. As soon as she was gone, I buzzed the nurse and asked her to take them away. I told her I was allergic. The lie tasted less bitter than the truth. When I was finally discharged, it was not to the comfort and care of my daughter. Clara had arranged for a medical transport service to take me home, citing a critical work deadline that she couldn't possibly miss. I arrived at my silent house, a stranger in my own life, hobbling on a walker and facing weeks of painful recovery alone. The company she had hired to provide in-home care was competent, but the woman, a kind soul named Maria, was a paid professional, not family. Her kindness was transactional, a stark reminder of the emotional bankruptcy of my own blood. In the quiet solitude of my recovery, with nothing but time and my throbbing hip for company, my mind began to clear. The morphine haze lifted, but the emotional fog of a lifetime of self-deception was also beginning to burn away. Clara's cruelty at the hospital had not been an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern I had willfully ignored for years. I started to think back. It was like watching a film of my own life, but this time, I was seeing it with new, painfully clear eyes. I remembered her wedding, a lavish affair at a country club that cost more than my first house. David had been alive then, but he'd been hesitant. Is this what Clara really wants? Or is this what she thinks she should want? He had asked me one night, looking over the staggering invoices. I had defended her, of course. "It's her special day, David. Let her have it. We paid for every last cent of it." Clara's thank you had been a perfunctory peck on the cheek before she whisked off on a month-long European honeymoon, also funded by us. Then there were the cars, the reliable family sedan when their son, Leo, was born. Then the luxury SUV 5 years later, because Clara felt she deserved something nice. Each time, they'd come to us with a well-rehearsed story of financial hardship, of unexpected expenses. "We're just a little short, Dad," Mark would mumble, staring at his shoes, while Clara laid out the problem with the dramatic flair of a seasoned actress. And each time, we had written the check. Because that's what parents do, I had told myself. You help your children. The memories kept coming, a relentless tide of withdrawals from my emotional and financial bank account. The down payment for their sprawling house in the suburbs, a house much larger than they needed. The annual family vacations to 5-star resorts where I was expected to cover the bill for everyone, yet was often left to babysit my grandson, Leo, while Clara and Mark enjoyed spa treatments and romantic dinners. The renovations on their kitchen granite countertops and stainless steel appliances they insisted were an investment. My home, my life, had become their personal ATM, and I had let it happen. I had mistaken their reliance for affection, their need for love. David had seen it. He had tried to warn me in his gentle way. "Helen, you have to let them stand on their own 2 feet, he would say. "You're not helping them by always being their safety net." But I was so afraid of losing them, so desperate for the illusion of a close, happy family, that I ignored him. I enabled them. Lying in my bed, wincing as I shifted my weight, the truth settled over me like a shroud. They didn't love me. They loved what I provided. The moment I became a burden, a problem, the moment my needs superseded their wants, I was no longer a beloved mother. I was a dramatic old woman, an obstacle, an inconvenience. The bitterness of that realization was a poison in my veins. It was a grief sharper and more profound than the one I had felt when David died. When I lost him, I lost my future. Now, I was realizing I had also lost my past, or at least the version of it I had so carefully constructed in my own mind. One afternoon, about a week after I'd returned home, the doorbell rang. Maria, my caregiver, was out getting groceries, and I slowly, painstakingly made my way to the door with my walker. I peered through the peephole and saw my grandson, Leo, standing on the porch. Leo was 16, a quiet, thoughtful boy with his grandfather's kind eyes and none of his mother's sharp edges. My heart gave a little lurch. I hadn't seen him since before the fall. I fumbled with the lock and pulled the heavy door open. "Grandma?" he said, his voice soft with concern. He looked at my walker, at my pale, drawn face, and his own expression crumpled. "Oh, Grandma, I'm so sorry." He stepped inside and wrapped his arms around me, careful of my hip. It was the first genuine, heartfelt hug I'd had in weeks, and I felt my composure crack. I buried my face in his shoulder, and the tears I had been holding back finally came, hot and heavy. He just held me, patting my back gently, murmuring, "It's okay, Grandma. I'm here." When my sobs subsided, he helped me back to my armchair in the living room. He pulled up the ottoman and sat at my feet, looking at me with an earnestness that was so much like David's it made my heart ache. "I wanted to come sooner," he said, his voice low. "Mom wouldn't let me. She said you needed your rest, but that wasn't it." He looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers together. "I heard them talking. Mom and Dad." I held my breath, waiting. "Mom was angry," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "She was complaining about the hospital bills and the cost of the home care. She said you were being selfish by staying in this big house all alone when you clearly can't manage it anymore." The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. Selfish. Because I wanted to live in the home my husband and I had built together. Because I dared to need help after a major injury. "And Dad?" I asked, my own voice a whisper. "What did your father say?" Leo shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his young face. "Nothing. He never says anything. He just agrees with her." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's not right, Grandma. What she said at the hospital. Calling you dramatic. I heard her tell Dad that on the phone. It's not right. I know you're in pain." He was my ally. In this desolate landscape of betrayal, this sweet boy was my one true ally. His validation was a balm on my raw, wounded spirit. He saw the truth. He wasn't blinded by greed or entitlement. He saw me. "Thank you, Leo," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "That means more to me than you will ever know." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the bond between us a warm, solid thing in the chilly room. He told me about school, about a girl he liked, about his dream of studying architecture. He was so full of life and promise, a bright spark in the encroaching darkness. He was David's grandson, through and through. Just as Maria returned, Leo was getting ready to leave. He gave me another hug. "I'll come back tomorrow after school, okay? I can help with things. You don't have to be alone." As I watched him walk down the path, I felt the first stirrings of something other than pain and betrayal. It was a tiny, hard kernel of resolve forming in my chest. David had seen this coming. He had known his daughter's character, and he would never have left me unprotected. 2 days later, just as Leo had warned, the escalating demand arrived. Clara and Mark appeared at my door, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. Clara was carrying a large, glossy folder. They didn't bring flowers this time. They brought an agenda. They settled themselves on the sofa opposite my armchair, a united front of false sympathy. "Mother," Clara began, her voice oozing with a carefully rehearsed solicitude. "Mark and I have been talking, and we are very, very worried about you." "It's not safe for you here anymore, Helen," Mark chimed in, managing to look me in the eye for a full second before his gaze skittered away to a painting on the wall. "This big house, all these stairs, after your fall." "He's right," Clara said, nodding gravely. "You need to be somewhere you can be properly looked after. Somewhere safe." She slid the folder across the coffee table towards me. "We've done some research. These are some of the top-rated assisted living facilities in the area. Beautiful places. They have activities, nurses on call, everything you need." I stared at the folder. The cover showed a group of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing bridge on a sun-drenched patio. It looked like a luxury prison. My home, the repository of my entire adult life, was being dismissed as a hazard. They weren't just suggesting I move. They were trying to erase me from the life I had built. "And what about my house?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Clara's eyes lit up with a greedy little spark, one she couldn't quite conceal. "Well, that's the best part. The real estate market is booming right now. We spoke to a friend, she's a top agent, and she said this house could sell for a fortune. It would more than cover the cost of your care for the rest of your life, with plenty left over." "Plenty left over for what, Clara?" I asked, looking directly at her. She had the grace to look momentarily flustered. "Well, for your comfort, of course. For anything you might need. And it would take such a weight off our minds, knowing you were safe and sound. And of course, it would simplify things down the line." Down the line, the inheritance. That's what this was about. Selling my home, my sanctuary, to liquidate my main asset for their future convenience. They wanted to pack me away in a neat little box, manage my funds, and wait for me to die. The kernel of resolve in my chest hardened into steel. They saw me as a doddering, helpless old woman, a problem to be managed. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea who my husband was. Before he died, in those last few quiet months when the illness was stealing him away from me bit by bit, David had been preternaturally lucid about certain things. One evening, as I was helping him with his medication, he took my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear and intense. "Helen," he'd said, his voice a dry rasp, "after I'm gone there might be pressure. From Clara, about money, about this house." "David, don't talk like that," I'd whispered, my throat tight. "No, listen to me," he'd insisted. "I love our daughter, but I am not blind to her flaws. She has a sense of entitlement that frightens me, and Mark is no help. He is a leaf in her wind." He paused, gathering his strength. "I've made arrangements to protect you. If you ever, for any reason, feel pressured or disrespected or like you are being backed into a corner, you call Mr. Thompson, Arthur Thompson, my lawyer. Do you understand? Don't argue, don't fight. Just call him. Promise me." I had promised, my heart breaking. I had filed it away as the morbid but loving rambling of a dying man. I had never imagined I would actually need to make that call. Now, looking at my daughter's eager, predatory face, I knew it was time. "You've given me a lot to think about," I said, my voice smooth as silk. I pulled the glossy folder towards me. "Let me look over these. It's a big decision. I need some time." Clara beamed, her relief palpable. She thought she had won. "Of course, Mother. Take all the time you need. Just not too much time. The market is hot right now." They left soon after, convinced of their victory, leaving the cloying scent of their ambition hanging in the air. I waited until I heard their car pull away from the curb. Then, I reached for the phone. With a steady hand, I picked up the receiver and dialed the number for the law firm of Thompson, Gable, and Finch. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong. I'd like to make an appointment to see Mr. Arthur Thompson. My name is Helen Cartwright. It's a personal matter. On the instruction of my late husband, David Cartwright. The law office of Thompson, Gable, and Finch was a world away from the chintzy, faux concern of Clara's brochures. It was located on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a place of hushed reverence, old leather, and polished mahogany. The air smelled of money and discretion. When I gave my name to the receptionist, a ripple of quiet efficiency went through the office. I was clearly expected. Mr. Thompson greeted me personally at the door to his office. He was a tall, silver-haired man, perhaps a few years younger than I was, with the same kind eyes I remembered from David's annual company parties. He had been David's lawyer and friend for over 40 years. He took my hand in both of his grip firm and warm. "Helen," he said, his voice a deep, reassuring baritone. "It is so good to see you, but I am so sorry for the circumstances. David told me you would only call if you had need. Please come in. Sit down." He led me to a plush leather armchair that faced his large, impeccably organized desk. A window behind him offered a breathtaking panorama of the city, but my focus was entirely on him. He didn't rush me. He had his assistant bring in a tea service, and he waited until I had taken a few sips and felt my nerves begin to settle. "Now," he said gently, steepling his fingers, "tell me what's happened." And so, I told him everything. I started with the fall, the sickening crack, and the blinding pain. I told him about Clara's reaction at the scene, her dismissal of my injury. I recounted the scene at the hospital, her words echoing in the quiet office. "Stop being dramatic. It's just a minor injury." I told him about her complaints, her perfunctory visit, the cheap flowers. And finally, I told him about the visit 2 days ago, the brochures for assisted living, the pressure to sell my home. As I spoke, his expression shifted from gentle concern to a deep, quiet anger. His jaw tightened, and a muscle ticked along his cheek. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his gaze unwavering, making me feel seen and heard for the first time in a very long time. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "I see," he said, his voice low and tight. "David was afraid of this. He hoped he was wrong, but he was a pragmatist. He knew his daughter, and he loved you more than anything in this world, Helen. He was determined to protect you." He swiveled in his chair and turned to a large, formidable-looking safe built into the wall behind his desk. He spun the combination lock with practiced ease, and the heavy door swung open with a soft, satisfying thud. From within, he withdrew a thick, leather-bound portfolio tied with a ribbon. He placed it on the desk between us. "David was a very successful man, Helen," Mr. Thompson began, untying the ribbon. "I know he was always modest about it, but he was also a brilliant investor. He didn't just run a successful engineering firm. He made a number of exceptionally shrewd investments in technology startups back in the 80s and 90s. He never told you the full extent of it, did he?" I shook my head. "He said we were comfortable, that we would never have to worry. That was all." Mr. Thompson smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That was David, understated to the last. "Helen, you are not comfortable. By any reasonable measure, you are an exceedingly wealthy woman." He opened the portfolio, revealing columns of figures, stock certificates, and deeds. The numbers were staggering, so large they seemed abstract, unreal. I saw figures with 7, 8, even 9 zeros after them. My breath caught in my throat. "All of this," he said, gesturing to the portfolio, "is yours. It is held in a series of trusts that David and I structured years ago. The primary beneficiary of every single asset, every stock, every property, is you, and you alone. You have sole, absolute, and unfettered control over all of it." I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. this fortune, this power, had been sitting here, silently, all along. But that's not what David was most proud of, Mr. Thompson continued, his voice dropping slightly. He reached back into the safe and pulled out a single, sealed envelope made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. My name was written on the front in David's familiar, elegant script. "This is the real shield he built for you." He slid the envelope across the desk. My hands trembled as I took it. It was a letter. From David. I broke the wax seal and unfolded the thick pages. "My dearest Helen," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and that Arthur is sitting across from you in his ridiculously expensive chair. It also means that my fears have come to pass, and for that, my love, I am so deeply sorry. I am sorry for any pain our daughter has caused you. I have spent my life trying to protect you from every hardship, and the thought that I could not protect you from this one is the great sorrow of my passing. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you at that university dance, looking so impossibly beautiful in that pale blue dress. You have been the sun in my sky, the anchor of my life. Every success I have ever had, I had for you. Every penny I earned was to build a life of comfort and security for you. But I have seen the shadow in Clara's heart for a long time. It is a hunger that can never be filled, a love of things over people. I fear she sees you not as her mother, but as a resource. I have tried, perhaps foolishly, to quench that hunger with generosity, hoping it would teach her to be generous in spirit. I see now that it may have only fed the fire. That is why Arthur has explained our true financial standing. It is all yours, Helen. It was always for you, but I have added a specific provision to my will. Arthur calls it the matriarch's codicil. It is a legal instrument of last resort, a weapon for you to wield if you must. The codicil is simple. It states that I leave a significant, but not life-changing, inheritance to Clara and her family, contingent upon one thing: your well-being and your peace of mind. However, should Clara, or any member of her immediate family, cause you significant emotional distress, public humiliation, or attempt to unduly influence your financial or living arrangements against your express will, you, and you alone, have the power to void their inheritance entirely. Arthur's testimony as to the circumstances will be legally binding and final. This is not an act of revenge, my love. It is an act of protection. It is a shield. I want you to live your remaining years in peace, in dignity, in the home we shared, surrounded by memories of our love. Do not let anyone take that from you. You have been the kindest, most generous soul I have ever known. Do not be afraid to be strong. Your strength is a part of you I have always admired. Use this power if you must. Reward those who show you true kindness. I have a feeling young Leo has a good heart. And live, Helen. Live fully, joyfully, and on your own terms. That is my final and most fervent wish. All my love. For all of time, David. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the ink on the page. They were not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming love and gratitude. David had seen it all. He had known me, loved me, and from beyond the grave, he had handed me a sword and a shield. The letter was not just a legal instruction. It was a validation. It was permission to fight back. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. I looked up at Mr. Thompson, my vision clear, my resolve hardening from steel into diamond. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now overlaid with something new, a cold, quiet fury. "The matriarch's codicil," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me more about it." Mr. Thompson explained the legal mechanics. It was ironclad. David's reputation for meticulous planning extended to his estate. The way it was worded, any challenge from Clara would be fruitless and would only expose her own behavior in a court of law. "So," I said, the plan already beginning to form in my mind, "if I were to say, allow my daughter to believe I was considering selling my house, and she were to push the matter, and I felt that this was causing me significant emotional distress. A slow smile spread across Mr. Thompson's face. He leaned back in his chair. Then you would be well within your rights to invoke the codicil, Helen. David gave you the power. What you do with it is entirely up to you. A strange sense of calm settled over me. The trembling in my hands had stopped. For weeks, I had felt like a victim, a frail old woman at the mercy of her callous daughter. But I wasn't a victim. I was the queen on a chessboard they didn't even know we were playing on. They brought a realtor's card with them, I said. A new, icy strategy solidifying in my mind. A friend of theirs. They want me to call her. Do you want me to handle it? Mr. Thompson asked. I can make it very clear that the house is not for sale. I shook my head. No, I don't think so. I think I'll make the call myself. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. My daughter thinks I'm a dramatic, helpless old woman, I said, the words no longer holding a sting. They were just a statement of fact about her perception. She thinks she has me backed into a corner. I think it's time I let her see just how far she's willing to go. I stood up, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years, my broken hip a distant, manageable ache. Thank you, Arthur, for everything, for being David's friend. He was my friend, Mr. Thompson affirmed, standing as well, which makes me yours. Call me for anything, Helen, day or night. I walked out of that office, not as Helen Cartwright, the grieving widow and burdensome mother, but as Helen Cartwright, the sole executor of David's legacy and the wielder of the matriarch's codicil. Clara and Mark wanted a drama. I decided then and there that I would give them one, but I would be the one writing the final act. When I returned home, the glossy folder from the assisted living facility was still sitting on my coffee table. I picked it up, walked it into the kitchen, and dropped it into the recycling bin without a second glance. My new strategy required a different kind of performance. I was no longer a passive victim. I was now an active, if silent, strategist. The first step was to play the part they had cast for me. The next morning, I called Clara. I deliberately made my voice sound a little frail, a little uncertain. Clara, dear, I began. I've been thinking about what you said, about the house. I could practically hear the triumphant smile in her voice. Oh, Mother, I'm so glad. I knew you'd see reason. It's for the best, truly. Well, it's a big step, I said, letting a slight tremor enter my words. You mentioned your friend, the realtor? Perhaps it wouldn't hurt just to talk to her, to see what the house might be worth. Of course! That's a wonderful idea, she chirped, her excitement barely contained. Her name is Brenda. I'll have her call you this afternoon to set up a time. You won't have to do a thing. We'll handle everything. The word hung in the air. This was their project now. I was merely the inconvenient occupant of their future windfall. That's very kind of you, dear, I said softly, and hung up the phone. A cold, hard knot of satisfaction settled in my stomach. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to walk into it. Brenda, the realtor, called within the hour. Her voice was overly bright and professionally sympathetic. She spoke to me in the slow, loud tones people reserve for the very young or the very old. We scheduled an appointment for her to come and assess the property in 2 days' time. The day Brenda was due to arrive, Clara and Mark showed up an hour early. Clara bustled around the living room, plumping cushions and straightening pictures that were already straight. We want the place to look its best, Mother, she explained, though she was clearly speaking to Mark. First impressions are everything. We could get top dollar for this place. The location alone is prime. Mark nodded dutifully, peering at the crown molding. Good bones. This house has good bones. A little updating in the kitchen, a new master bath. A developer would snap this up in a heartbeat. I sat in my armchair, the one David had always favored, and listened. I was an invisible observer in my own home. a ghost already haunting the space they were mentally renovating and selling. They moved from room to room, their voices floating back to me, a litany of greed. "We could use the money to finally finish the basement," I heard Clara say from the hallway. "And a new pool. Leo would love a pool. And we could pay off my student loans," Mark added, his voice filled with a hopeful whine. "Finally get out from under that debt." "And a proper vacation," Clara continued, her voice dreamy. "Not just a week in the Caribbean. I'm talking about Italy. A month in Tuscany. We've earned it, Mark. After all we've had to deal with. Deal with. They meant me. My broken hip. My existence. It was a hardship they had endured, one for which they deserved a lavish reward. The icy resolve within me grew colder, sharper. Every word they spoke was another nail in their own coffin. When Brenda arrived, she was exactly as I had pictured her. Sharp suit, sharp smile, and eyes that saw not a home, but a commission. She shook my hand with a limp, patronizing touch and immediately directed all her conversation to Clara. "It's a fantastic property, Clara," Brenda gushed, walking through the rooms. "A bit dated, of course, but the square footage is incredible. We'll market it as a charming vintage home with unlimited potential. Buyers love that." They talked about staging, about curb appeal, about knocking down walls. David's study, his sanctuary filled with books and maps and the quiet echoes of his intellect, was dismissed as a potential mother-in-law suite or home office. The garden I had spent decades cultivating was a blank slate for modern landscaping. I let them talk. I offered them tea, which they accepted absent-mindedly. I sat quietly, the perfect portrait of a docile, compliant old woman being gently guided toward the inevitable. I nodded when they spoke to me, gave one-word answers, and watched as they planned the dismemberment of my life with cheerful, predatory enthusiasm. After Brenda left, armed with measurements and a signed agreement to represent the potential sale, Clara was euphoric. She came over and patted my shoulder, a gesture devoid of any real warmth. "See, Mother, that wasn't so bad, was it? Brenda thinks we could have an offer within a week of listing. It's all going to work out perfectly." "Perfectly," I echoed, my voice flat. Over the next week, I continued my silent strategy. I let Clara handle the phone calls. I ignored the emails from Brenda with lists of comparable properties. In the background, however, I was busy. I had 2 long, productive phone calls with Arthur Thompson. I had him draw up new documents. I made arrangements, and I asked my grandson, Leo, to come for dinner, alone. Leo arrived with a book for me, a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver. "I thought you might like this, Grandma," he said, his earnestness a soothing balm. Over the simple meal I'd had Maria prepare, I decided to be honest with him, at least in part. I didn't tell him about the full extent of the fortune, or the codicil. That would be too great a burden for a 16-year-old boy. But I told him that his grandfather had left me in a very secure position. "Leo," I said, looking him in the eye, "your mother and father believe I am going to sell this house." He looked down at his plate. "I know. I hear them talking about it all the time. About the money. I want you to know," I continued, my voice firm, "that I have no intention of selling this house. This is my home. It was your grandfather's home, and I will live here for as long as I choose." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and then relief. A slow smile spread across his face. "Really, Grandma?" "Really," I affirmed. "And I want you to know that your grandfather was very proud of you. He saw your good heart. He made provisions to ensure that your future, your education, would always be secure, regardless of anything else. He didn't need to know the details. He just needed to know he was loved and valued, not for what he could provide, but for who he was. It was the security his parents had never given him, and the security they were about to lose." "Grandma, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. Just keep being the wonderful young man you are. That's all your grandfather and I ever wanted." The final stage of my plan was set in motion a few days later. I called Clara. "I've made my decision about the house," I announced, keeping my voice neutral. "I think it's time we all sat down and had a formal discussion. There are some things we need to finalize." "Of course, Mother." Clara's voice was triumphant. "When? We can come over tonight." "No," I said firmly. "Not tonight. This Saturday, at 2 o'clock. Here. I want it to be a proper family meeting. Please make sure you and Mark are both here. And I'd like Leo to be here as well." There was a slight pause. "Leo? Why?" "He is part of this family," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "And there are things in his grandfather's will that concern him. Also, I've invited my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, to join us, just to make sure all the paperwork is handled correctly." That gave her another pause. I could hear the gears turning in her head. A lawyer? That made it sound official, final. She was probably already mentally calculating their share of the proceeds. "A lawyer? All right," she finally agreed, her voice practically vibrating with anticipation. "Yes, that's probably wise. Saturday at 2. We'll be there." The trap was not just set anymore. The bait had been taken. All that was left was to spring it. The next few days were the calm before the storm. I rested. I read the poetry Leo had given me. I talked to David, quietly, in the stillness of his study. I told him what I was about to do. I told him I was finally being the strong woman he always knew I was. And in the quiet of my heart, I felt his approval, a warm and steady presence giving me the final ounce of courage I needed. Saturday arrived, a crisp, clear autumn day. The sunlight streamed through the windows of the living room, illuminating the faint layer of dust on the grand piano. I had asked Maria to come in just for the morning. We had prepared a simple spread of tea, coffee, and cakes, setting them out on the dining room sideboard. An absurdly civilized stage for the impending demolition. I chose my outfit with care. A simple but elegant wool dress in a deep sapphire blue, a color David had always loved. I wore the pearl necklace he had given me for our 40th anniversary. I was not dressing as a victim. I was dressing as the matriarch of this family, the guardian of his legacy. Mr. Thompson arrived first, precisely at 1:45 p.m. He carried a handsome leather briefcase and exuded an aura of calm, unshakable authority. He greeted me with a warm, supportive smile. "Are you ready, Helen?" he asked quietly. "I am," I replied, my voice steady. We sat in the living room, making small talk, waiting. The clock on the mantelpiece, a gift from David's parents, ticked away the minutes with a solemn, rhythmic beat. Each tick was a countdown. At 2 o'clock on the dot, the doorbell chimed. Clara, Mark, and Leo. I watched on the small security monitor David had installed years ago as they came up the walk. Clara was beaming, dressed in a sharp business-like suit as if she were attending a corporate merger. Mark, beside her, looked nervous and eager, like a dog hoping for a treat. And Leo, my dear Leo, looked apprehensive, his shoulders slumped, as if he sensed the tension in the air. I took a deep breath and smoothed the fabric of my dress. "Showtime," I murmured to Mr. Thompson. He gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I opened the door myself. "Clara, Mark, Leo, thank you for coming. Please come in." Clara swept into the house, her eyes immediately scanning the room, already seeing it through a buyer's eyes. "Mother, you look well." "Mr. Thompson, what a surprise to see you here," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was a bit thrown by his presence but quickly recovered, assuming he was here to expedite her inheritance. Mark mumbled a hello. Leo, however, came straight to me. "Hi, Grandma," he said, giving me a quick, supportive hug. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, dear," I whispered back, patting his arm. "Go and get yourself some cake." We all settled in the living room. Clara and Mark took the sofa, sitting forward on the edge of their seats, a pair of coiled springs. Leo chose a chair slightly apart from his parents, near me. I sat in my customary armchair, with Mr. Thompson seated beside me, his briefcase resting on the floor next to him. The air was thick with unspoken expectation. Clara, never one for patience, decided to begin. "Well, this is all very formal," she said with a light, tinkling laugh. "So, Mother, you said you've made a decision. We are all ears. Brenda has a cash buyer lined up, you know. He's very motivated." This was it, the final provocation. Her eagerness, her complete disregard for any sentiment I might have for my home. Her casual mention of the cash buyerette was also perfectly, damningly in character. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, savoring it. I looked at my daughter, at her handsome, greedy face, and felt not anger, but a profound and weary pity. She had no idea what she was about to lose. It was so much more than a house. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. Then, I placed the cup and saucer carefully on the table beside me. I folded my hands in my lap and looked directly at Clara. "Yes, I have made a decision," I said, my voice calm and clear, ringing with an authority she had never heard from me before. "First, I want to thank you, Clara. And you too, Mark. You have been very helpful these past few weeks." Clara preened, exchanging a smug glance with her husband. "Of course, Mother. We only want what's best for you." "Yes," I continued, a faint, ironic smile touching my lips. "You have helped me to see things with perfect clarity. You have shown me exactly what is best for me." I turned slightly towards my lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps you could begin." Mr. Thompson opened his briefcase and took out a thick, official-looking document bound in blue. It was a copy of David's last will and testament. He also took out a smaller, single-page document. "As you know," he began, his formal legal voice filling the room, "I was your father's attorney and the executor of his estate." He was very specific in his instructions regarding the disposition of his assets after his death. Clara and Mark leaned forward even further, their eyes fixed on the will. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "The primary structure of the will is straightforward," Mr. Thompson continued. "With a few minor bequests to charities and old friends, David left the entirety of his estate properties, investments, and personal effects in trust to his beloved wife, Helen Cartwright." I saw a flicker of annoyance cross Clara's face. She knew this part. This was the inconvenient delay before she and Mark could get their hands on the real prize. "However," Mr. Thompson said, his voice dropping slightly, gaining weight, "David was a man who planned for every contingency. He included a specific and legally binding codicil to the will, a codicil that is only to be invoked under certain circumstances." He picked up the single sheet of paper. "I am going to read the relevant portion of this codicil aloud." He cleared his throat. "The matriarch's codicil. A conditional inheritance is set aside for my daughter, Clara Vance, and her family. This inheritance is contingent upon their continued demonstration of love, respect, and support for my wife, Helen. In the event that my daughter, or her spouse, should cause my wife significant emotional distress, public or private humiliation, or exert undue pressure upon her concerning her financial or living arrangements against her will, my wife, Helen, is granted the sole and absolute authority to declare their inheritance null and void." A stunned silence fell over the room. Clara's face had gone slack with shock, her mouth slightly agape. Mark looked pale and confused, as if he were trying to translate a foreign language. "The invocation of this codicil," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice relentless, "requires only my wife's testimony to me, as executor. My judgment on the matter, as witness to her testimony, shall be final and legally binding, precluding any and all legal challenges." He placed the paper down on the coffee table. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Clara found her voice first. It was a strangled, disbelieving squeak. What is that? What does that mean? Is that even legal? It is perfectly legal, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Thompson said coolly. And I can assure you, it is ironclad. I decided it was time for me to speak again. I turned my gaze back to my daughter. It means, Clara, that Dad saw you. He saw you for exactly who you are. He loved you, but he was not a fool. The color was starting to return to Clara's face, not as a healthy glow, but as two bright, angry spots on her cheeks. This is ridiculous. We have never done anything but love and support you. Really? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Let's review the last few weeks, shall we? When I fell and broke my hip, a serious and painful injury, you told me to stop being dramatic. You called it a minor injury. You stood by while a doctor confirmed I needed major surgery, and you scoffed, suggesting a little bed rest would do. Does that sound like love and support to you, Clara? She stammered. I was in shock. I was worried. No, I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. You were annoyed. You were inconvenienced. Your dinner reservation was more important than your mother's broken bone. You then proceeded to pressure me, relentlessly, to sell my home, not for my safety, but for your financial gain. You brought a realtor into my house and planned its sale while I sat here, listening to you mentally spend the proceeds on new pools and trips to Tuscany. You did this while I was at my most vulnerable, recovering from surgery. Mr. Thompson, in your professional legal opinion, does this behavior constitute significant emotional distress and undue pressure? Mr. Thompson looked at me, then at Clara, his expression grim. By any reasonable definition, yes, it most certainly does. Then I am invoking the codicil, I announced, the words falling like guillotine blades into the silent room. Effective immediately. Mr. Thompson, you have my testimony. You have my instruction. The reality of the situation finally slammed into Clara, her face contorted, twisting into a mask of pure rage. No, you can't. This is a trick. You set us up. She shrieked, jumping to her feet. This was a test, and you set us up to fail. It was a test, yes, I agreed, my voice remaining perfectly calm. A test of your character, and you failed spectacularly. This wasn't a setup, Clara. This was me, finally opening my eyes and seeing the truth that your father saw long ago. Mark finally spoke, his voice a pathetic bleat. Helen, please. We didn't mean it. We were just worried about you. You were worried about my money, Mark, I said, turning my cold gaze on him. And your silence, your weak-willed complicity in your wife's cruelty, makes you just as guilty as she is. You stood by and said nothing. Not at the hospital. Not here in this house. You are not a husband. You are an accomplice. Clara's rage suddenly dissolved into desperate, panicked tears. Mother, please. You don't understand. We're in debt. We need that money. You can't do this to us. I'm your daughter. A daughter does not treat her mother as a walking bank account, I said, my heart hard as stone against her pleas. A daughter does not mock her mother's pain. You stopped being a daughter to me in that hospital room. Today, you are just a woman who has made some very poor choices and is now facing the consequences. I had one final piece of business. I turned to my grandson. Leo had been sitting in stunned silence, his face pale, watching the entire drama unfold. Leo, I said, my voice softening. He looked at me, his eyes wide. Your grandfather, in his wisdom, made other provisions. He wanted to reward genuine kindness and love. Mr. Thompson, you have the other document? Mr. Thompson nodded, pulling another document from his briefcase. This is an amendment to the Helen Cartwright Trust, he announced. It was prepared this past week and signed by your grandmother. It names a new primary heir to the entirety of the Cartwright estate upon her passing. He paused for dramatic effect. The new primary heir is her grandson, Leo Vance. If I thought Clara's rage was something to behold, it was nothing compared to this. A strangled, guttural sound escaped her throat. She stared at her own son as if he were a snake. Him? You're giving it all to him? I am giving it to the only person in this room who has shown me an ounce of sincere, unselfish love, I declared. The only person who came to see me not because he wanted something, but because he was worried. The only person who saw my pain and apologized for your cruelty. He is David's grandson, and he is worthy of his legacy. You are not. That was the final blow. Clara let out a scream of pure, animalistic fury and lunged, not at me, but towards the coffee table, as if to rip the will to shreds. Mark, for once in his life, acted, grabbing her arm and holding her back. "You will not touch me!" she shrieked at me, her face contorted and ugly with hate. "You will not see me, and you will never ever see your grandson again. Do you hear me? You are dead to us." "I think it is the other way around," I said quietly. "You are the ones who are dead to me. Now, please get out of my house." Mark dragged his sobbing, screaming wife out of the room. Their exit was not quiet or dignified. It was a whirlwind of slammed doors, shouted obscenities, and the sound of a car peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. And then, there was silence. A deep, profound, and peaceful silence. The ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece seemed louder now. Mr. Thompson began quietly packing his briefcase. I looked over at Leo. He was staring at the door his parents had just stormed through, his face a mixture of shock, horror, and a dawning understanding. He turned to look at me, his eyes full of questions. "Grandma," he whispered, I don't want your money." I reached out and took his hand. It was trembling. "I know you don't, my dear," I said gently, "and that is precisely why you are deserving of it. This isn't about the money, Leo. It never was. It's about respect. It's about love. Now, how about a piece of that cake? I think we've all earned it." A year. It felt like a lifetime. 12 months had passed since the day I had reclaimed my life, since the storm of Clara's rage had passed through my house and left behind a cleansing peace. The first few weeks were difficult. The shock of the confrontation lingered, and there were moments of profound sadness for the daughter I had lost, or perhaps the daughter I had never truly had. But that sadness was gradually replaced by a quiet, steady sense of freedom. My hip healed. The walker was replaced with a cane, and eventually, even that was discarded. The physical therapy had been arduous, but my new purpose gave me a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was no longer just healing a bone. I was rebuilding a life. I did not sell the house. On the contrary, I poured resources into it. David's dusty, neglected study was transformed. With Leo's budding architectural talent, we redesigned it. We kept the dark wood and the book-lined walls, but we added comfortable seating, modern lighting, and a state-of-the-art computer system. It became the headquarters for the David Cartwright Literacy Foundation, a charity I established with Arthur Thompson's help to provide books and tutoring programs to underserved children in our city. The house, once so silent and empty, was now filled with new sounds. The excited chatter of children during our Saturday reading hours, the murmur of conversation from the board meetings of my new foundation, the laughter of old friends I had reconnected with, who I now hosted for weekly bridge games and potluck dinners. It was no longer just a repository of memories. It was a living, breathing place of purpose and joy. Leo was my constant companion in this new life. He spent weekends and summers with me. The cloud of his parents' toxicity seemed to lift from his shoulders. He was free to be himself, kind, creative, and brilliant. The funds from the trust ensured he would attend the university of his dreams without a moment's worry about tuition. But more than that, our bond deepened into a partnership. He advised me on foundation projects, his youthful perspective invaluable. I advised him on life, on girls, on the importance of integrity. We traveled together, taking a trip to Italy, not the lavish, status-seeking tour Clara had dreamed of, but a quiet, immersive journey through Florence and Rome, sketching in museums and eating in small, family-run trattorias. We were building our own family, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection. As for Clara and Mark, their downfall was as swift as it was predictable. Without the constant safety net of my checkbook, their carefully constructed lifestyle collapsed. They had been living so far beyond their means, leveraged to the hilt in anticipation of an inheritance that would never come. Within 6 months, the for sale sign went up in front of their sprawling suburban house. They were forced to downsize to a small, cramped apartment on the noisy side of town. The luxury SUV was repossessed. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that their marriage had fractured under the strain. Without the shared goal of managing my wealth, they were left with only their own shallow personalities and a mountain of debt. They turned on each other, the bitterness and blame poisoning what little was left of their relationship. Last I heard, they were separated. Clara tried to reach out, once. A letter arrived, filled with self-pitying apologies and vague accusations, ending with a desperate plea for money. It was the letter of a stranger. I read it, felt a fleeting pang of sorrow for the person she could have been, and then passed it to Mr. Thompson to handle. He sent a curt, formal reply stating that all communication must go through his office. She never wrote again. One crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 1 year after the confrontation, Leo and I were in the garden. I was planting tulip bulbs for the spring, my hands sunk deep in the cool, rich earth. Leo was sitting on a bench, sketching the design for a new community library my foundation was planning to build. He looked up from his notepad, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Grandma," he said, "do you ever miss them?" I paused, my trowel resting in the dirt. I considered the question honestly. Did I miss the constant anxiety, the feeling of being taken for granted, the sharp, cutting words disguised as concern? Did I miss the daughter who looked at me and saw only a bank account? No, I said, and the truth of the words settled peacefully in my soul. I miss the idea of what we could have been. I grieve for the family I thought I had, but I don't miss the reality of what it was. I looked around me, at the beautiful garden, alive with the promise of future blooms. At the house, my home, now filled with light and purpose. At my grandson, a fine young man with his grandfather's eyes and a future as bright as the afternoon sun. I looked at a portrait of David that hung in his study, visible through the window. I gave it a small, silent nod of thanks. He had given me more than wealth. He had given me the tools to reclaim my dignity, the strength to demand respect, and the wisdom to know the difference between a financial transaction and a family. True wealth wasn't in the bank. It was right here, in the rich soil under my fingernails and the unconditional love of the boy on the bench. I was no longer a victim. I was the matriarch. And I was finally, completely, at peace. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Thank you for watching until here. For more content like this, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites. We hope to see you there.